I was already on my second glass of water when I understood no one was coming. The table sat right beside the lake, close enough for me to hear the soft slap of water against the dock posts. 60 years old, and I was staring at 8 empty chairs with folded white napkins and untouched wine glasses catching the amber light from the hanging lanterns. My birthday dinner was supposed to start at 7. By 7:15, I was still checking the path that led in from the parking lot. By 7:20, I stopped. My wife, Elise, had texted first. "So sorry. Terrible migraine. I can't drive in this condition." 2 minutes later, my son, Daniel, sent his message. "Client emergency. Tried to move it. Can't get out of it." My daughter, Tessa, said her car overheated on the interstate. My brother, Jake, claimed food poisoning. My business partner, Neil, said he got pulled into an insurance situation at one of our sites. Each excuse arrived neat, polished, just believable enough. That was the problem. If you spent 30 years in construction, you get good at spotting when things don't line up. A foundation settles wrong. A wall bows half an inch. A number looks fine until you check the one beside it. The messages felt like that, separate on the surface, connected underneath. The waitress came by with the same careful smile she'd been wearing since she seated me. "Would you like a few more minutes before ordering?" I looked at the empty chairs again. My wife's seat was at the head beside mine. Jake's was across from me. Daniel liked aisle seats. Tessa always wanted to face the water. Neil had asked for this restaurant himself 3 weeks earlier, said 60 deserved something better than steak in the club dining room. "Go ahead," I said. "I'll order." She hesitated for half a second, then nodded and took out her pad. I ordered the ribeye, medium rare, garlic potatoes, creamed spinach, a glass of red I usually save for deals closing or bad news delivered cleanly. Tonight it was both. When she left, I took my phone from the table and read the messages again, one by one. Not because I needed to, but because I want to feel how carefully they've been arranged. Not one call, not one messy apology, just controlled distance, coordinated absence. Across the lake, the last of the daylight was flattening into gray-blue. Somewhere behind me, cutlery touched china. Low voices drifted. A woman laughed too loudly and then stopped. My table stayed silent. I sat back in my chair and loosened one button on my jacket. Anyone watching would have thought I looked calm, maybe disappointed, but calm. They would have been right. Because the truth was, I had stopped expecting loyalty from any of them weeks ago. Tonight wasn't the shock. Tonight was the confirmation. 3 weeks before that dinner, I was in my office above the main yard, looking through a quarterly expense report Neil told me not to worry about. That alone was enough to make me worry. Neil had been with me for 19 years. He knew I read everything. He also knew I could tell the difference between a sloppy mistake and a hidden one. The invoice that caught my eye was small compared to the others. Landscaping work billed to one of our storage lots. Not impossible. Just odd. We didn't use outside landscapers for lots we already maintained with our own crews. I printed it out and set it aside. Then I found another one. And another. Same vendor. Different jobs. Rounded numbers. Clean descriptions. Too clean. The kind of paperwork made by someone who thought neatness looked honest. That was the first crack. The second came 4 nights later, when Elise left her phone face up on the kitchen island while she went upstairs to shower. She never did that. Not anymore. For the last year, her phone had become a private organ she carried everywhere, even to refill a glass of water. That night it lit up once, and all I saw was a preview. "Miss you already." No name, just a number. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. People reveal more when they think they're safe. After that, I started watching instead of asking. I noticed how Elise smiled at messages she never answered in front of me. How Jake suddenly defended Neil in meetings before I even challenged him. How Daniel asked strange questions about 2 upcoming bids that were supposed to stay internal. How Tessa, who claimed she was finding herself, kept posting from boutique hotels and wellness resorts she couldn't afford on her own. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the group chat. I found that a week later on an old family iPad Tessa had synced years ago and forgotten to unlink. At first, I thought it would be harmless. Photos, dinner plans, holiday nonsense. Instead, I found a thread without me in it, and about me in almost every line. They joked about my routines, my clothes, the way I still order breakfast at 6:30 on Sundays. Jake called me the old Foreman King. Daniel laughed at that. Tessa said I'd never notice anything unless it was printed on company letterhead. Elise didn't say much, but when she did, people stopped and reacted. That told me all I needed to know about who set the tone. I sat there in the dark breakfast room with the screen glowing in my hands and felt something colder than anger settle into place. Not pain, not shock, clarity. I didn't confront a single one of them. I went to work the next morning, signed checks, returned calls, kissed my wife on the cheek, and asked my daughter how Arizona had been. Then I started building a plan. By the time my steak arrived, I had already decided I would stay for the full dinner. There's something about finishing what you started, even when it turns out differently than expected. Especially then. The plate was set down in front of me with practiced care. The meat still hissed softly, butter melting into the surface. The smell was rich, familiar. I picked up my knife, cut a precise piece, and took a bite. Perfect. Across from me, 8 empty glasses reflected the candlelight like quiet witnesses. Halfway through the meal, just as I reached for my wine, the bartender approached instead of the waitress. He moved slower, more deliberate, like someone stepping into something he didn't fully understand. "Sir," he said quietly, placing a folded piece of paper beside my plate. "This was left for you." I looked at it for a second before touching it. No name on the outside, just my table number written in clean block handwriting. I unfolded it once. "Look at your email." That was all. No explanation. No signature. I didn't react. I finished chewing, took a sip of wine, and only then reached for my phone. My inbox was already open. One new message sat at the top. Sender, Richard Hale. Elisa's uncle, a retired judge who hadn't contacted me directly in over 5 years. I opened it. "Mark, whatever you've started, stop. You're stepping into something that will not end the way you think. Call me before this goes any further." No greeting, no warmth, just control wrapped in warning. I read it twice, then once more, slower. Richard Hale didn't send messages like this unless he was certain of 2 things: that something legal had already moved, and that he was too late to quietly contain it. That was the moment everything aligned. The invoices, the accounts, the access changes I had triggered 48 hours earlier. The filings my attorney confirmed would process today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. I placed the phone face down on the table and continued eating. Across the lake, the last light disappeared completely, leaving only reflections, small, controlled, artificial. Behind me, the restaurant carried on like nothing had changed. At my table, nothing had, but somewhere else, everything just had. Most people think contracts are about what's written in bold. They're wrong. The real power sits in the parts everyone schemes. The clauses that sound outdated. The ones written by lawyers who assume someone someday might actually need them. 32 years ago, when my father was still running the company, he signed a partnership agreement with 2 men who are long gone now. I remember sitting in his office back then, watching him argue over wording that didn't seem to matter. He told me something I didn't understand at the time. "People don't plan for when things go bad," he said. "They assume loyalty lasts forever." He didn't. Buried on page 17 of that agreement was a clause titled Protective Dissolution Authority. It allowed the majority owner, if one could prove coordinated harm against a company, to remove involved parties immediately. No vote, no delay, just proof and execution. For years, everyone treated it like a relic. Even our current legal team had dismissed it during a routine review, calling it functionally obsolete. That was their mistake. 3 months ago, when I first noticed the inconsistencies in our books, I asked a different kind of lawyer to look at it. Not a general advisor, a specialist, someone who made a career out of finding life in things other people buried. We sat in a quiet office with no windows, just a long table and a stack of old documents that smelled like dust and ink. He read the clause twice. Then he looked at me and said, "This still holds, but only if you can prove coordination, not suspicion, not implication. Coordination." So I built it, not quickly, not carelessly. I mapped transactions across accounts, matched timestamps, traced approvals, connected signatures, every invoice, every transfer, every decision that looked harmless on its own but formed a pattern when placed together. Neil's landscaping company wasn't real in the way it needed to be. It existed on paper, tied to a shell account that funneled money out in controlled amounts. Jake had authorized multiple secondary approvals that bypassed standard review. Daniel had access internal projections he had no reason to see, right before competitors adjusted their bids. Tessa's retreats aligned perfectly with expense spikes that never returned value. And Elise had access to everything through me. That mattered more than anything else. I didn't accuse them. I documented them. Every piece was dated, verified, cross-referenced. By the time I handed the file over, it wasn't suspicion anymore. It was a structure. And 2 days ago, I signed the activation. No announcements, no warnings, just a quiet submission that moved through the system the same way rot moves through wood, unseen until something collapses. Back at the table, I finished the last bite of my steak and set the knife down neatly beside the plate. They thought the clause was forgotten. So did everyone else. That's why it worked. People think betrayal is loud. It isn't. It's quiet numbers in clean spreadsheets. It's signatures that look routine. It's approvals that happen one click too easily. If you don't slow down, you miss it. If you do, it becomes impossible to ignore. I slowed down. The landscaping invoices were the entry point, but they weren't the story. They were just a thread. Once I pulled it, everything else started to move. The company tied to those invoices had no real footprint, no active crew, no equipment registered under its name. Just a mailbox address and a bank account that received payments from us and redistributed them in smaller, less noticeable pieces. Neil never signed those invoices directly. He didn't need to. He approved the budgets they were attached to. Jake handled the secondary confirmations. That was his role in the company. Oversight. He used it well. Too well. His approvals created legitimacy. A second set of eyes that made everything look clean, except it wasn't. I built a timeline across 6 months. Every invoice, every approval, every transfer. Then I overlaid it with internal activity logs. That's where Daniel appeared. He had accessed bid projections for 3 major projects within hours of those same figures appearing, slightly adjusted, through competing firms. Not identical, just close enough to win, close enough to hurt us. Tessa was different. She didn't hide anything. She never thought she needed to. Her expenses were labeled as development retreats, client networking, wellness investment. Words that sounded productive until you matched them against actual returns. There were none. Just flights, resorts, private bookings. Paid through accounts she shouldn't have had unrestricted access to. And Elise never touched the numbers directly. She didn't have to. She had me, my access, my trust, my name attached to approvals I barely remembered signing. Small things, spaced out, always during weeks I was overloaded. Documents placed at the bottom of stacks. Digital confirmations buried between real decisions. I went back and checked. Every one of those approvals led somewhere. Not always to money. Sometimes to silence. Sometimes to access. Sometimes to cover. I documented everything. Screenshots. Copies. Time logs. Cross-references. Nothing emotional. No commentary. Just facts placed in order until they told a story no one could argue with. By the end, it didn't feel like I was uncovering separate betrayals. It felt like I was looking at one system. Coordinated. Structured. Intentional. A family. A business. A network. All working together. Just not for me. Back at the restaurant, I folded my napkin once, slowly, and placed it beside the plate. 8 empty seats. 8 clean files. Everything accounted for. 3 days before that dinner, I sat in a glass office on the 32nd floor with a woman who didn't waste time pretending things were reversible. Her name was Karen Holt. Corporate restructuring. Precise. Quiet. The kind of attorney who didn't raise her voice because she never needed to. She had already read everything I sent, every document, every timestamp, every connection. When she walked in, she didn't ask if I was sure. She asked one thing. Do you want this clean or do you want it painful? I poured myself a glass of water and answered without thinking. Clean. She nodded once, like she expected that. What followed wasn't dramatic. No speeches. No warnings. Just controlled decisions made in sequence. Ownership structures were reviewed first. I held majority share, but not in a way that protected me from internal damage. That changed within 48 hours. Through a series of legal adjustments, completely valid, fully documented, control consolidated, not aggressively. Inevitably, then came the accounts. Primary operating accounts were flagged for internal audit. Secondary accounts, ones that had been quietly feeding the system I uncovered, were frozen pending review. No alarms, no notifications beyond standard procedure. Access began to disappear. Credentials stopped working. Authorizations expired. Permissions quietly revoked themselves like they had never existed. Jake would notice first. His morning routine depended on access. Then Neil, then Daniel. Tessa wouldn't understand it immediately, but she would feel it when her next expense didn't go through. Elise would feel it when nothing responded the way it always had. Karen slid a final set of documents across the table. Once you sign this, she said, there's no partial reversal. This is full separation of control. Anyone tied to the activity you documented is removed operationally the moment filings finalize. I read the first page, then the last. I didn't rush. I never do with things that matter. Outside the window, the city moved like it always did. Cars, glass reflections, people who thought their day was stable. I signed one document, then the next, then the last. Karen collected them, aligned the edges perfectly, and placed them into a folder without looking up. It processes in stages, she said, but the trigger is already active. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and thanked her. No handshake lingered. No unnecessary words. By the time I left that building, the system I had built over 30 years no longer belonged to anyone but me. Not emotionally. Legally. Back at the restaurant, I reached for my wine again and took a slow sip. They thought tonight was absence. They didn't understand. This wasn't where things ended. This was where they would start noticing. Jake always believed he was untouchable. Not because he was smarter than me. Because he thought I would never move against family. He built his position on that assumption. In meetings, he spoke like he carried the company on his back. Told people he was the one keeping things modern, the one making hard decisions while I stayed old school. I let him say it. I let others believe it. It made what came next cleaner. There was another clause in the agreement. Smaller. Easier to miss. It didn't deal with ownership. It dealt with authority. If any executive was found acting against the financial interests of the company, their decision-making power could be revoked immediately. Pending review. No vote required. Just documented cause and proper filing. Jake had signed that clause himself 12 years ago when we updated internal governance. He never thought it would apply to him. 2 days before my birthday, I filed it. No confrontation. No warning. Just a submission backed by the same documentation I had already built, his approvals, his overrides, his quiet signatures attached to transactions that should have never existed. The effect wasn't loud. It never is. The next morning, Jake walked into the office like he always did. Coffee in his left hand, phone in his right. He would have gone straight to his desk, logged in, started moving things around like he owned the place. Except this time, the system didn't respond. Access denied. At first, he probably thought it was IT. A glitch. A password issue. Something small. Then he would have tried again. And again. Then he would have called someone. That's when it would have started to sink in. Because no one could fix it. Not IT. Not Neil. Not anyone. His authority wasn't malfunctioning. It was gone. By noon, a formal notice would have reached him. Clean language. Legal tone. Informing him that pending internal review, all decision-making privileges were suspended effective immediately. No accusations. Just facts. Jake doesn't handle silence well. He's loud when he's comfortable, louder when he's cornered. I can picture it clearly. The pacing, the calls, the shift from anger, confusion to something closer to fear. Because for the first time, he wouldn't know where he stood. And worse, he wouldn't know what I knew. Back at the restaurant, I checked my watch. 8:12 p.m., right about the time Jake would realize this wasn't temporary. I set the watch back down and leaned slightly into my chair. Family, he always said, should stay inside the circle. He was right. That's exactly where I kept him, right until I closed it. The first call started before I finished my dessert. I didn't pick up. My phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time in quick succession. I glanced at the screen without touching it. Daniel, then Tessa, then Daniel again. Predictable. They didn't notice the money when it was flowing. They noticed the moment it stopped. I took a slow bite of cheesecake, let the fork rest against the plate, and watched the lake instead of the screen lighting up beside me. Daniel would have been first to feel it. His accounts were structured through layered access, professional, clean, justified on paper. But once the restructuring triggered, those pathways collapsed instantly. The internal privileges that let him view projections, move funds, adjust figures, gone. And more importantly, flagged. He wouldn't just lose access. He'd realize someone had been watching. Tessa would come next. Her world wasn't built on systems. It was built on availability. Card that worked. Bookings that confirmed. Quiet approvals that made her lifestyle feel normal. Tonight, one of those cards would have declined. Maybe at a hotel check-in. Maybe at dinner with people she wanted to impress. Maybe in front of someone who didn't know where the money came from. That's when it hits people, not when something disappears. When they're seen without it. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. Tessa, Dad, something's wrong with my account. Can you call me? Another one, almost immediately. Daniel, what did you do? No greeting, no confusion, just accusation. I picked up the glass of wine, took a measured sip, and set it back down exactly where it had been. They still didn't understand. This wasn't something I did tonight. This was something I had already finished. The consequences were just arriving on schedule. A third message appeared. Tessa, I'm serious. I can't access anything. Then a call again. I let it ring. Around me, the restaurant continued its quiet rhythm. Conversations, laughter, plates moving in steady patterns. Nothing disrupted, nothing out of place, except my table. 8 empty chairs, and a phone that wouldn't stop trying to reach me. I turned it face down again. This wasn't punishment. Punishment is emotional. This was structural. They built their lives on access they didn't earn and trust they didn't respect. Now both were gone, and for the first time, they were noticing. Elise always chose controlled environments. Soft lighting, quiet music, places where everything felt curated, like nothing real could reach her there. So it made sense she was at a spa when they found her. I didn't arrange it for drama. I arranged it for timing. Late morning, mid-treatment, the point where people are the most relaxed, the most removed from anything outside those walls. That's when the documents were delivered, not by me, by process. Certified, logged, received. My phone didn't ring right away. Elise was different from the others. She didn't react immediately. She processed first, calculated, looked for angles. But there are moments when even the most controlled people run out of space. That moment came 42 minutes later. Her name appeared on my screen. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. I didn't speak first. Her voice came through tight, controlled, but not steady. What is this? I leaned back slightly in my chair, looking out over the dark water. Documentation. I said, silence. Then, sharper, you froze accounts. You locked access. Now I'm being served legal notices in a spa mark. What are you doing? I could hear movement in the background. A door closing. Privacy. Good. You missed dinner, I said. That broke something. Don't do that, she snapped. Don't pretend this is about tonight. It isn't, I said calmly. Another silence. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Less control. More urgency. My uncle contacted you, didn't he? I received an email. He's trying to help you, she said quickly. You don't understand what this looks like from the outside, if this goes further. It already has. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been done. She exhaled sharply, like she was trying to reset the conversation. Mark, whatever you think is happening, we can talk about it. We can fix this. But you need to undo what you started. There it was. Not denial. Not even apology. Control. She still thought this was a situation she could manage if she said the right things in the right order. I glanced at the empty chairs around my table. You didn't come tonight, I said. That's not. It is. I cut in quietly. It's part of a pattern. She went still on the other end, because now she understood. This wasn't one decision. It was a record, a sequence, documented. Mark, she said, slower now, careful. What exactly are you trying to prove? I picked up my glass, but didn't drink. I'm not trying to prove anything, I said. I already did. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was collapse. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the quiet realization that there was no version of this conversation where she regained control. I can fix this, she said finally, softer now. We can fix this. I stood from the table, placing cash beside the check without looking at it. No, I said, and this time there was no hesitation. You can't. I ended the call before she could answer. For the first time in a long time, she had nothing left to negotiate. 3 weeks later, I made the same reservation. Same table. Same time. The hostess recognized me, just slightly. Not enough to say anything, but enough to pause half a second before leading me back. People remember patterns, especially broken ones. The lake looked the same. Still, flat, reflecting the evening light like nothing had ever disturbed it. I sat down and placed my phone on the table. No messages. No calls. Not anymore. The first week after that dinner had been noise. Constant. Daniel tried anger first, then explanation, then something close to negotiation. Tessa cycled through panic, tears, and silence. Jake showed up at the office twice before security stopped letting him in. Neil never called. That told me everything I needed to know about him. Elise, she tried the longest. Not emotionally. Strategically. Messages through attorneys. Carefully worded proposals. Attempt to separate personal from professional. Like the two had ever been independent. They all thought this was something that could be adjusted. Reduced. Managed. It wasn't. The filings held. The restructuring finalized. Ownership stayed exactly where I placed it. Clean. Legal. Irreversible. I ordered the same meal. Ribeye. Medium rare. Garlic potatoes. Creamed spinach. The same glass of red. When the waiter asked if anyone would be joining me, I looked at the empty chairs for a moment. Then I said, no. No hesitation. No explanation. Just no. The food arrived and I ate slowly. Not because I was waiting for anything, but because I wasn't. That was the difference. 3 weeks ago, every empty chair meant something. Expectation. Habit. Assumption. Now they were just chairs. Across the lake, the light faded the same way it had before. Quiet. Predictable. Controlled. I took a sip of wine and let the silence settle around me. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. Clear. Undisturbed. Mine. For 60 years, I built everything with other people in mind. Family. Partnership. Shared weight. Shared reward. And they used that carefully, quietly, until they didn't think I would notice. I cut into the steak again, steady, precise. I had noticed. I just didn't say anything until it mattered. The check came. I paid it without looking at the total. As I stood to leave, I glanced once more at the table. 8 empty seats. No longer reserved. I adjusted my jacket, turned, and walked out without stopping. For the first time in a long time. Nothing followed me. And that was the point.